Greetings and welcome to the Saroth the Mage experiment. Good afternoon, Spooky, Nine Eland, and Jet Petty. Long time no see. Is my volume okay? It doesn't look very loud at the little green bits here. Can you hear my voice, people? It's a little bit hoarse, actually. Thank you. Yes, it's actually a free app. It's the Kaossilator. It's by Korg. Hey, Sarlux. Yeah, you can hear my voice good, yeah? Excellent. Yeah, I think this normally costs about like $17.99, but I noticed one of my friends, Ron Fiasco, might watch this later. So if it's still free, I would snap it up because it's excellent. You can really... I mean, I'm not quite sure how I managed to do that, but... it's a wonderful little toy. So I just thought I'd really check in. Hey, John Aside, how's it going, man? I thought I would just check in with everyone because it feels like a long time. I was isolated at the gorgeous, and could I just say, before I go any further, Saroth Star, love of my life, my constant companion for the last 2 weeks. And despite all the craziness that's going on, it has been the happiest 2 weeks of my life. I've never felt so mentally well, so comfortable. So it's been fantastic. She's been off work. I've been off work. Her kids have been off school. And it really is like one big happy family. She's home teaching her 6-year-old. And it's been absolutely beautiful. It's surreal, really. I could never have imagined a virus would pretty much shut down the whole world. Mind-boggling. And I mean, what's next? You know, there's going to be worse viruses than the COVID flu virus. I know very little about it, so I'm not going to pontificate on that. But what I do want to talk about today is just like to kind of reassert the Saroth the Mage channel. As you know, I don't claim to be an expert in anything. I'm just always been very interested in magic and occultism. And the recent death of a seminal figure in modern magic, Genesis P. R.A.W, really got me thinking. So the other night, to be honest, I'd never paid much attention to Genesis P.R.H. I knew of the Temple of Psychic Youth, Topi, because when I used to buy books from the only bookshop that I could get occult titles from in Aberdeen, a comic book shop called Plan 9. They used to do a lot of Crowley, Robert Anton Wilson, Golden Dawn stuff. And you often used to get little flyers for, like, there was a Golden Dawn one in there for the organization, the Golden Dawn, not the David Griffin Hogwarts disaster. Hey, Lord Josh, how's it going, man? I am well. I hope everyone here is well too. You're obviously well enough to tune into YouTube, so that's a good thing. So, where was I? Yeah, so Plan 9. I once got a book, I can't remember, it was one of the Samuel Weiser, you know, they reprint a lot of Crowley stuff, a lot of occult and sort of Robert Anton Wilson, kind of far out stuff like that. And I once got a flyer for the Temple of Psychic Youth with the double cross. That, because I've never really been into industrial music or anything, he kind of went, I missed him. I never really paid much attention to him till recently. Like a lot of figures, it's their death that actually draws my attention to them. And the other night, Saroth Star had gone down to Edinburgh to visit her mum, who sadly passed away. So if we could all say a wee prayer, final unction for Saroth Star's lovely mother, who I only met a couple of times. Hey, Davey, man, how's it going? Sorry to hear about your troubles. I only watched about 5 minutes and said welcome back, and then the story got kind of bad after that. But we'll talk later, man. So yeah, it was a night. I was all on my own in Saroth Star's house, and I've never slept in her bed alone. I've recently had a little dip where I found myself drinking a lot. You know, I mean, I think this is the first YouTube video I've made for months that I've been consciously and deliberately, a black shirt, sober. And being sober for me is like almost being high because I'm so not used to it. It's like, wow, I can see clearly. So I was sleeping at her house, couldn't sleep. I did a sigil. I was trying to meet like an angel or something interesting in my dreams, but it was such a light sleep that I didn't even dream that night. And I got up, and for some reason I decided to watch a longish. It was Genesis P.R.H. at the MoMA, Museum of Modern Art. I think it was somewhere in America. There's a few MoMAs, I believe. And it was really fascinating. It was the post panandrogyny Genesis P.R.H., who instead of he, it's really technically they. And I wondered who the we that he kept referring to in his conversation, like, oh yeah, when we went to boarding school. I thought, we can't be talking about the band. But of course, later I find out it's a beautiful romantic story about him and Lady J. Is it Breer, her name is? I really don't know a hell of a lot about him. But when I watched these videos, I really thought, wow, he is fantastically creative. And I'm not saying that. I think this is something I might get on to. I don't know how long I'm going to stay. And as usual, I've got nothing planned and I just kind of haver on. But, you know, he wasn't a saint, but, you know, I think very creative people do tend to have these very complex personalities. You know, he's been accused of being abusive with his then partner and kind of co-founder, I guess you could say, Cozy Vanny Tutti. He apparently threw a breeze block at her off a high rise and was very abusive and controlling. And that was when he was young as well. I think he matured. Oh, Saroth Star in the house. The most beautiful, fabulous woman in the world who saved my life many times over. And I'm really looking forward to getting back over. This flat is a sad, empty place without you, my darling. I much prefer your manner. Anyway, so yes, Genesis P.R.H., relentlessly creative, that's what I admired about him in a weird way, because I always get stuck with the intellectual aspects of magic. Which system works the best? Why does this person describe it? But I realized through watching, and I don't know what, it was just his kind of vibe and his zeitgeist about the whole thing, the experimentalism about it, the idea that you don't have to be good at something. It's better to create art, bad art, than create no art at all. And, I've been creating bad art all my life. So I instantly agreed with that. So I began to think, is my, I was very high that day. I only slept for about 2. I'd been taking like Xanax and stuff the week before, which I really never do anymore. But for some reason, I just, once an addict, always an addict. And I had a terrible 2 or 3 days on Xanax, because it just absolutely wipes out your memory. You don't know what you're doing. You think you're kind of sober. I don't know what I was doing. So I'm out of that, and I've been feeling very happy and sober for the last couple of weeks. I'm safe with Saroth Star. She makes me feel very safe. So the old, the 3 people I'm going to try and talk about today are Genesis P.R.A.W, Aleister Crowley, and William Burroughs. Aleister Crowley and William Burroughs, probably the 2 biggest influences on the young Saroth the Mage, or Steve Ray, as he's otherwise known. But I think Genesis P.R.A.W in those lectures showed that, not all his experiments for me have been that successful. I love Throbbing Gristle's more experimental, they're really groundbreaking experimental stuff. But Psychic TV, pretty middle of the road kind of garage band, really. But that's not the important thing. The important thing is just to continually recreate yourself, like me and Keats Ross discussed the other time. I've got my Golden Dawn tarot out. Each of these cards is a step in the process of enlightenment, really. If I can find the damn card I'm looking for. Yes, this one. The Tower. Continual destruction and then rebirth. And in magic and through ritual and meditation and stuff, you really are destroying the ego and rebuilding. That's what the whole systems like Thelema, Golden Dawn magic, any transcendental system of spirituality really does need to break down the programming that we're born into. We're born into a family, a religion. I can actually maybe do a little illustration of this idea with these cards. So, 0 in the tarot, often like a baby or a little child. And what was it Jesus said about, you've got to be as little children before you can enter the kingdom of heaven? So this is the beginning and the end of the tarot pack. And he's reaching for a fruit from a tree there, which has some interesting corresponding ideas. So say this is about the goal of magic, which is deprogramming yourself from. So let me just start. So there's the magician, young man. He has the elemental tools there. He's got his chalice, which is like love and empathy. He's got his sword, which is his intellect. He's got his wand, which I often equate with sexuality. And he's got his pentacle, which is like his earth element, his attachment to earthly ideas. So he's got, there's so many more correspondences, but as usually happens in live streams, I get nervous and I can't remember any of them. And I never write them down. So this high priestess for me is when the magician first encounters the mysteries. Something in him awakens. For me, it was, I'm afraid to say, but it was drugs. It was smoking pot and taking magic mushrooms showed me that there was a life beyond our common perception. If the doors of perception are truly cleansed, then men will see things as they are infinite. So this is just an early glimpse of the goddess and the mysteries. But to get to these mysteries, you have to overthrow the mother, which is the empress. I mean, I'm putting negative connotations on these cards because this is the programming that we're trying to overcome. So for me, this is, and she actually looks quite a lot like my mother, this card. So this is the empress. This is, your mother imprint. So you've got to overthrow that. You've got to eventually overthrow the authority of the father. You've got whatever religion you were born into. That has to be overthrown. You've also got your programmed sexuality also to be overthrown. And I could go through the deck like that. I'm not going to go on and on and on. So yeah, when Genesis Peorage and William Burroughs and Aleister Crowley's, although their ideas about magic were all very, very different, the one thing in common is they all have techniques for breaking down these robotic responses. Robert Anton Wilson talks about it as well. Oh yes, Robert Anton Wilson, I've got to speak about him because I put him in the title, so I can't cheat people by not talking about Robert Anton Wilson. So it's really been a fantastic couple of weeks because it's also, not having to work. The job that I got, that I was about to start, for some reason was pretty much cancelled. They got back to me saying there was something wrong with one of the references they got, but I wasn't going to be able to start till all this pandemic is over anyway. So it's kind of academic. I was it was a very bad day. Saroth Star got her very, very bad news later in that day. So, I mean, that was a hell of a day, really. I think we're both handling it pretty well. So I'm not allowed to go into my work as a relief worker because they're trying to keep it down to the minimum staff. So Saroth Star and me, we're off work for the foreseeable future. And it's been beautifully freeing. We're able to read and just hang out. Hey, Prospero, so nice to see you all. Wow, I really thought at this time of day there'd be no Americans in chat and I'd just be talking to myself again. But it's really nice to see everyone. So the books I've been reading was one, I actually sent it to Nine Eland. It was kind of random because I only, in Twitter, for some reason, I just sent it to like the first 4 or 5 people on the list. So I think I sent a copy to Nine Eland and one to Philip Blair, and I can't remember who else. But it's a book out. It's like a collection of essays, Aleister Crowley and the Western esoteric tradition or something like that. And although I'm ambivalent about Crowley, I mean, he's such a massive figure in the Western occultism that he can't be ignored. But, I don't blindly adore Crowley or Thelema. I think there's good bits and there's bad bits. There's a fascinating collection of essays. It starts with him and Victor Neuberg in North Africa when they did the Enochian calls and summoned the great demon Chrononzon 333, and goes on to talk about Crowley's influence on modern day Satanism, Scientology. There's a chapter on his some of them are only tangentially about Crowley. The chapter on Rosaline Norton I thought was very interesting, the Australian artist and kind of witch. I think she called herself a witch rather than a magician. So very fascinating book that. I also read Cosmic Trigger again. Cosmic Trigger was one of the most influential books on me when I was a young teenager and hadn't really done any practical magic by then. But the Cosmic Trigger is all about Robert Anton Wilson using various techniques. One of them was the invocation of the Holy Guardian Angel, which I think must be Liber Samek, which is a Crowley ritual. and various other things, taking LSD, smoking pot. And he did start to believe that he was in communication with beings from Sirius. And Sirius has a very important place in ancient Egyptian magic. And there's also like more modern stuff, like the Sirius mystery by that temple, who I did try and read once, but I found it very dry and a bit dull. So I didn't finish it. But yeah, fascinating book. I also read Masks of the Illuminati by Robert Anton Wilson, which was kind of fun. Not a very lightweight little book. It's about it reminds me very much of the book I tried to write on with Crowley. What did I call it again? Walter and Alistair, which was about a young SS man sent on a mission by Himmler and the Annenherb, however you pronounce it, the kind of occult bureau of the SS, to bring Crowley back to Germany. But of course, Walter and Crowley team up and defeat the evil Nazis. But I never finished the novel because I ended up swapping the laptop that it was on with no backups. There's a tiny little bit of it on my blog, Diary of a Dog Fiend, but all the rest was swapped for like a £20 bit of heroin when I was deeply addicted. I've got nothing to show for most of my artistic endeavors. Most of my paintings I gave away, but that's no bad thing. They might pop up somewhere when I'm dead for 100 years and be worth hundreds of thousands of pounds. So Masks of the Illuminati is quite a amusing little book. It's about, it opens with James Joyce and Einstein drinking in a bar, and an English aristocrat, Sir John Babcock, runs in, and it turns out that it's kind of been, I won't give the game away in case you want to read it. In fact, read it. It's good. It's called Masks of the Illuminati by Robert Anton Wilson. So I do have some notes. So I once did a show a long time ago with Lord Josh and Sam. And what I wanted to know was, what is magic? Because I still don't really know. And of course, it's far too broad to answer in one podcast. But in my channel, I am going to try and answer the question through a series, through the whole channel. All the shows I do are really trying to say, well, what is magic, So I wrote down a few things yesterday about what I think it is, because it's no two people really agree on what it is. You can say, Crowley, oh yeah, it's the art of, I think that's a very unsatisfactory explanation of the whole magical esoteric tradition of the West. Is basically down to causing change and conformity with the will. I think it's a lot more than that. So I wrote, it's a striving towards completeness, like Jung's idea of individuation, enlightenment, Crowley's idea of crossing the abyss, knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel, and in Robert Anton Wilson and Timothy Leary's 8th circuit model, it's opening that 8th circuit. That I find is the most useful model or metaphor for me. Something that also came to me when I was watching Genesis Peorage. I think that's, I go off track and then I come back. But the whole thing was, I finally think I understood what the Burroughs thing that you got from Hassan al-Sabah, nothing is true, everything is permitted. Because what does that mean? Nothing is true, everything is permitted. But what I got from it in a flash of illumination was the myths that we tell ourselves are true, untrue. None of them are true. The biblical creation myth of God floating over the formless abyss and create, none of these are literally true. So I wrote, I was very inspired that day and I wrote quite a lot. And it was like, all stories are equally untrue and useful. And I think where people make a mistake is they get fixated on one myth and they believe it and exclude all the other possibilities. Like, no, what happened was the Anunnaki landed, they mated with humans, or they cooked humans. There's so many mysteries. So nothing is literally true. None of the stories, the comforting little stories or the terrifying little stories we tell ourselves, are literally true. So for me, magic works on a spiritual level, a psychological level, emotional, physical, sexual level. And it's all about this idea of deprogramming yourself, perfecting yourself, and really making yourself into what you want to be. That's what Genesis P-Orridge did. He literally used himself as a canvas, and through he used a lot of drugs. He talked about ketamine, which is an especially interesting drug. Through this kind of self-experimentation, that's why I changed the name of the channel to the Saroth the Mage Experiment, because magicians are experiments in process. But I do look at some other magicians who talk as if they've got it all figured out, and they seem to talk about Lucifer or Satan or Baal or whoever they've just basically taken the religion of their parents, which they're trying to escape from, and just poured all these religious ideas into their demonolatry. And it just seems like, is that really magic, or are you just swapping the religion of your parents, which was, where are you breaking the programming with that? Okay, Lucifer's a rebel and Jesus isn't, but there's the old Kabbalistic trick that Messiah, and I think it's Nesach, it's a Hebrew word meaning serpent, both equal 358 in the Kabbalah. And a lot of people don't like Kabbalah. It's gone a bit out of fashion nowadays. But I think Kabbalah is a really good way of examining language and numbers. And it's a kind of early form of cut up. It's taking meaning and transforming meaning. And this is what magic is for me. It's the constant transformation or transmogrification of human substance into something else. A person who knows they know nothing. Exactly right, Nine Eland. When I was 16 years old, I thought I knew everything. I remember after 2 or 3 beers, I would explain my vast and occult theories about God and the universe. And, I really did think that was I thought I had it right. I thought I nailed it. But the more you learn, the less you actually know. Another major aspect of occultism is contact with non-human intelligences. And I think this is where the demonolators are really, that seems to be their main fascination, is communicating with, worshipping in a way, and kind of, okay, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. If you help me get this job, if you help me find this perfect partner, I'll give you a bit of raw liver and a glass of wine. Which seems, that's not my bag. But I have, again, before I actually had properly studied magic, I'd read a few books on Crowley. I'd read a lot of Burroughs, but Burroughs' novels are not overtly magical. I saw him as a purely literary figure until the advent of YouTube, and I could see all the kind of the side stuff that he did. The cut up is a very magical thing. His experiments with Brian Gizen, that's more magical. But I thought he was just using magical themes as a writer of fiction. I'm going to change this tune up a bit. So Yes, it's also a real philosophical inquiry into the really big questions that art and philosophy, mathematics and science tries to come to grips with. But I think the answers are within us. One of the major hermetic ideas is we are the microcosm within the macrocosm, a fractal of the divine, really. Although I don't really believe in God, I do believe that something must have started evolution. Evolution is really God, the way I think about it. And we are still evolving. And this virus, are things ever going to get back to how they were after this? And do we want them to go back to how they were? I think people might see through the rat race and the crowding into trains every morning to go to a job that really does nothing but keep someone else. We need a massive rethink of how society is structured. And it's wonderful to think that the planet is actually getting a chance to breathe. Man. So yeah, the big philosophical questions: who am I? What am I? Where did I come from? Involving like language. How did language develop? How did consciousness develop? Evolution, again, very fascinating to me. Where am I going? Where's the human race going? What's going to happen to me when I die? What is my purpose? True will, some people might call that. The aim of magic for me was to be more creative, and for my art to have greater depth and weight, like Picasso. Cheers, Nick 93 2200. 93's brother. Allowing full expression of this thing called my soul when I was very young. Again, before I'd really started any practical magic, I always used to keep diaries, and I used to think these are an expression of my soul, poetry and just ideas about what was happening in my life. My dad was a constant journal keeper, and I've never ever opened one of them. I've always been slightly afraid to look at my dad's diaries because I know there was a lot of stuff about me in it, and how my addiction kind of messed with his head. But he was a chronic alcoholic, so his addiction kind of, the sins of the father and all that. Another aim of magic, one of the more obvious ones, is to be wealthier, happier, to have better relationships, more sex, more satisfying sex, to gain recognition as an artist. And the financial thing is always, money doesn't guarantee happiness, but poverty absolutely guarantees misery. And I've been through desperate periods of poverty, as had my family. My dad, he was a captain in the Merchant Navy. So when he was working, we would have an embarrassment of riches. My parents had no sense of money. So it'd be a constant feast and famine, feast and famine. So I've been programmed to do that myself. So, I'm not I think a part of magic is taking responsibility for everything that happens to you and everything you do. Not to the point where if you're raped or attacked or anything, that's not your fault. But, we have to be aware of these programs that are running all the time. And that's where the Leary-Wilson 8 circuit model can really be a good guide to how you program first your 4 terrestrial circuits, they would say, and then how to open your further 4 higher circuits. And I think pretty much accidentally, I have opened 2 or 3 of the higher future circuits, absolutely by accident. So how long have I been going? I'm not going to mutter on endlessly, but it's good to be streaming again, And this is coffee. Look, coffee. It's so nice not to have to feel like I need like 2 or 3 beers before I can even go on YouTube, because drugs and alcohol kind of make me more extroverted, but naturally I'm quite introverted. You might notice I don't really join in many Twitter conversations or what's that other one? Discord. Hi, Out of Mind. It's nice to see you. It's nice to see you all. I always see and I always watch CW and Davey and the gang, and I always miss you guys. So yeah, I've always had a real fascination with counterculture, with music, drugs, fashion, art. It really started by when I found that Rolling Stones record, Through the Past Darkly, in my granddad's big old-fashioned wooden, it had a record player and a radiogram is what you used to call them. And as soon as I found that record, it was kind of Brian Jones. I think it was released in 1969 to kind of commemorate his death, or as Jen P and myself agree, murder. I'm not quite sure who murdered him or why, but he was a very strong swimmer. There was no water found in his lungs, apparently, at the autopsy. Very fishy death. Mick and Keith had stolen his girlfriend. They'd stolen his fashion sense. That really, if you look at Mick and Keith before Brian Jones began to fade into the background, they really were kind of square compared to him. And then as he grew weaker, they grew stronger. They started wearing the scarves, the Moroccan jewelry. They really did leave him like a husk. And I think it was Jen P that mentioned that he was going to form a band. Was it with Keith Moon, John Lennon, and Jimi Hendrix? That would have been one hell of a band. So yeah, I was always really fascinated with that druggy, musicy 60s. The 60s, I was growing up in I was born in 1969. So one of the first things that really woke me up as a teenager was Sid Vicious. And again, it was only when he died and the News of the World had a huge front cover saying, "Sid is dead." And it had a picture of him with a gorgeously black spiky hair and his leather jacket with no shirt on in some weird pose. And I thought, oh my God, who is that? It was just so exotic and fascinating to a child of 10, 11 as I was then. I became a massive Sex Pistols fan. And then a little bit later, I found a book on magic called Magick, an Occult Primer by David Conway. And he described the astral realm. And in those days, it seemed to me like a place that you could actually kind of physically go to. I realized that's kind of naive. It's a lot more subtle and a lot more nuanced than that. But I'm still trying to get to that astral realm. I also had a fascination with Hammer horrors, the English horror films, very innocent and again, very 60s. They had big busty vampire chicks and kind of zoot-suited, groovy 60s, To the Devil a Daughter and The Devil Rides Out were two of my favorites. They were Dennis Wheatley novels, believed to have been based on Aleister Crowley, the Black Magician, and those. So one night, that was one of the few things my dad and I did together, was watch these horror films. And he once said to me one night out the blue, "Son, tell me you will never mess with drugs or the occult." So I thought, okay, Dad, thanks for the advice. And I've done nothing but mess with drugs and the occult ever since. I had my first line of speed, amphetamine sulfate, when I was 12 years old. And, that's scary to think that someone so young. But I did look older, and the older kids just always kind of dragged me along. So from my obsession with punk, youth culture, I got really interested in Northern Soul All-Nighters, the mod counterculture, smart suits, Fred Perry's. We loved the Who's Quadrophenia. I think that's one of the reasons industrial music kind of passed me by. It was always very goth, and we were kind of the antithesis of goth. We liked to dress smart. And, it was a very different culture. Another important strand in magic. I was very interested after I had my first mushroom trip and realized the visual quality of what you see when you're on mushrooms. Colors are brighter, everything's wavy lines. My mum, for some reason, got me a book on post-impressionism, and in that book were the works of I always say Van Gogh. I know you Americans say Van Gogh, but because Scots have this sound in our language, Van Gogh, I'm sure they say Van Gogh in Holland and not Van Gogh. But anyway, his art seemed so trippy. I think he was involuntarily tripping all the time. And everything kind of collided in this gorgeous art, music, drugs. I began to read William Burroughs. I think Naked Lunch was the first novel, and it's a bit of a slog. It doesn't have much narrative. It's exciting. Crowley, Rigardi, Chaos Magic, a lot of the Samuel Weiser, like I've mentioned. I got really into Picasso, Cubism, an artist called Modigliani. And I got into this idea of, my French is terrible, but they're like doomed poets, the romantic idea of the poet or the artist starving in a garret. Poet maudit, I think they're called in France. And for a while, I think Van Gogh. I did think I was destined to become, it's a silly, childish, romantic idea that there's something glorious about starving for your art and not getting a proper job. But in a way, that's what Genesis P.O.R.A.G. did. He talks about a time when he had some kind of serious medical complaint, and he was admitted to hospital, and he had an out-of-body experience. He'd been put to a very, brutal private school, although they're called public schools in Britain for some reason. And he thought, right, what am I going to do with our life? Or at that time, he'd met, I think Lady J was dead by that time. So he was like, what are we going to do with our lives? And he just refused to get a 9-to-5 job. And he said, what's the worst that can happen? That you're going to starve to death? And he rightly thought, well, very few people really have to starve to death in modern Britain. So I admire him for that, his bravery in not, to keep his artistic principles. Although I don't think he was a naturally gifted, brilliant artist. I think he was just one of those very strong personalities who just wouldn't compromise, Like I say, bad art is better than no art at all. And one thing you can't accuse Genesis P.O.R.A.G. of is not being constantly creative, constantly reinventing himself, constantly thinking of new and novel ideas. There's that line from the poet Arthur Rimbaud. You become a poet through something, I don't know the exact quote, a prolonged disordering of the senses, which is very like the Doors thing, which is where they got their thing. So my whole thing has been through my whole life is like the road of excess leads to the palace of wisdom, from another singular genius, William Blake. So we're kind of taking magic out of the spiritual, religious context and really putting it into more of an art experiment, which is where I feel much more comfortable. When I did get kind of sidetracked into thinking of magic as a kind of religious endeavor, it really broke me and put me off any magic for months. In fact, today was the first time I've done a banishing pentagram ritual and a banishing hexagram ritual for literally weeks, if not months. So it was good to come back, not feel like I had to start drinking beer immediately, get the kitchen cleaned, have a shower, get the old dagger out. This is my ritual dagger, by the way. So, yeah. So what I've been missing doing really is to making these little kind of arty, well, I have to make everything on a mobile phone pretty much because I'm terrible at editing. The only video editor. I know how to use is Vlogit, which is incredibly simple. But because all my equipment is here and I've pretty much been in isolation with the beautiful solar star, I haven't had my equipment. So I really felt the need to connect with the channel again. Because it's doing, in a year and a half for such a niche little channel. It's got almost 725 subscribers now. Once I get to 1,000, I'll be able to live stream without all this. I'll be able to use my mobile phone. So that's hopefully. Tell your friends, subscribe to Saroth, the incredible electric mage. I'll talk for a little bit longer, and then I'll finish off with a little bit more music and a poem I wrote recently. Yeah, so psychedelics really did open the door for me. I always remember that night. I mean, I'd taken mushrooms before in a group, but I think I hadn't taken enough. You get giggly, colors are a little bit brighter. But this night I took a shitload and wandered off on my own. There's a beautiful park in Aberdeen called the Duffy Park. And it really did seem, the only thing I could compare it to in my mind was like the Garden of Eden. I literally thought I was communicating with trees, which I probably was. They spoke in this deep bass rumbling kind of language. So I sat for about an hour just communicating with this ancient old tree. I wandered around. Plants were alive. Everything was alive. Everything looked like a Van Gogh painting, ultra bright colors. So my whole life I've been chasing that. But it would be nice to get there without having to use drugs all the time. Although I do feel another psilocybin adventure is not far off. So I've written here, I communicated with an ancient tree in slow vegetable rumbles. I flirted with a pretty young rosebush. So going forward with the Saroth the Mage experiment, I'm ditching God. I'm really ditching the idea of magic being spirituality. For me, it's more like a brain technology, much more in the Robert Anton Wilson vein. A consciousness opener. And like Crowley, in his introduction to the Goetia, which is one of my little clips that I've done. I think I've just called Aleister Crowley's introduction to the Goetia. He talks about the spirits of the Goetia being portions of the human brain. I think Robert Anton Wilson would agree with that. Although he did, I don't think anybody writes off the idea that spirits do have independent existence, and many magicians would be absolutely horrified at the thought that I'm saying that they are parts of our psychology. I think they're both kind of inside and outside, and so much in magic is self-contradictory, and it's chapel perilous. That's how Robert Anton Wilson describes it. As soon as you start practicing magic, you get wrapped into this weird mesh of synchronicities, and Robert Anton Wilson had the number 23 occurring again and again. For me, it was 222, 22, 13, which was the name of my band, named after the 13th card in the tarot deck, which is death, not actual physical death, but death and resurrection, like the tower, to die and to be born again in a sort of higher form. I love these Golden Dawn. This is the Israel Regardi Robert Wang deck. So that's why I called the band 13. Yeah, absolutely, Sarlux. Transcendental meditation. It's the 4 future circuits are. One thing that struck me when I was rereading Cosmic Trigger, it was written in 1974. And he made a lot. I mean, his daughter was murdered. So I think a lot of his obsession, you could say, with immortality and longevity was perhaps to do with that, but it would be great if humans could live for, not indefinitely perhaps, but if we could have lifespans of 200, 300, 400 years, imagine the wisdom and knowledge that we could accrue in that time. It does seem like, youth is wasted on the young. As soon as you're old and wise enough to know what you should be doing with your life, it's coming to an end, But a lot of the predictions he made about space travel and longevity just have not materialized. Like Terence McKenna, another genius who I love, who came up with this rather baroque system using like I Ching, I believed he kind of based on, or Yi Ching, I should say, the 64 hexagrams. I was maybe going to do an I Ching reading with these coins today, but I don't think I'll bother. And when I get home to Saroth Star, a lot of their predictions are way off the mark. And what he didn't seem to see coming was the internet, artificial intelligence. So, he was optimistic, but, predictions are very, very difficult. And nobody seems to have saw. McKenna did see the possibilities with the internet, but Robert Anton Wilson, I can't remember him really mentioning it much at all. Yeah, well, when I remember sitting smoking dope with my good friend Kev Byers, who later became the bassist in the band 13, and we were 16 or 17 with our flared jeans on and our Chelsea boots, listening to the Rolling Stones. And we're like, oh yeah, like by 25, we'll be married and we'll have proper jobs. Good Lord, I'm 50 and I still don't have a proper job and I'm still not married. Although I am married to Saroth Star. She is my soulmate. I would like to marry you, Saroth Star, if you're still listening. And it's a leap year, so if you propose, I will say yes. So where was I? Yeah, Cosmic Trigger and how it was kind of product of the consciousness expansion movement of the 60s. You had that wonderful expansive time when it seemed like things could be different and magic, hey Charles, was being rediscovered. And then, what's happened to that? There is, the magic revival is still going strong, but is it really changing the world like we used to think it could? Right. Oh, one thing I did want to read, the Golden Dawn is a very Christian Judaic kind of system. But if you take the God, I was reading an article by R.A.W, one of the leading lights of the Golden Dawn. I think he was Aleister Crowley's secretary for a while. But he's also a Reichian and a psychologist. And he really stresses the importance of the psychological aspects of magic. And I was reading an article on the Bornless ritual, which is the Crowley called it the preliminary invocation of the Goetia, although I'm not sure it was part of the Goetia. I think he might have just tacked it on. All these systems are really syncretic and, they all just mixed up. There's no clear, definitive path in magic. Systems inevitably spill over into others. When Western people first started going over and encountering Eastern systems, they kind of incorporate it. So everything's just a huge mishmash of consciousness changing techniques. So, there's long, complicated names, which I have tried to kind of gently take the piss out of in this poem that I'm about to read. And he said that the names of power really have no meaning. They're just to be used as a psychedelic way of getting you into an altered state of consciousness. And that is the basis of all magic. It's altered states of consciousness. The problem is the concept of authority, in my opinion. What is magic? Self-proclaimed authorities limit any. Yes, exactly. I, as someone who have studied and practiced occultism, not in any great depth, I must say, I'm not like I'm not driven to. I did do the Golden Dawn curriculum pretty much every day for a year and a half to 2 years. But it's very hard to keep going. And as soon as you get a job, of course, it's pretty much impossible, especially if you've got a relationship and a normal life. I think it's okay for, monks or people who have got endless amounts of money who can afford to take retreats and not work for. But this is what this coronavirus has opened up for me. It's nothing, when me and Saroth Star wake up in the morning, obviously we've got the wee boy in his schooling. But it's just beautiful to know that we don't have to do anything that day. It's very freeing. It's a liminal time where, things might seem grim, and financially it is a scary time, but especially for us consciousness experimenters, it's a wonderful opportunity, I think. And things will get back to normal, perhaps. So, as part, I'm technically on the practicus part of the Golden Dawn curriculum, and I was going to read out the invoking the 4 powers of water because I think it's very poetic and beautiful. So you basically do pentagrams in the 4 directions. You say words of power. You draw the elemental sign, which is an eagle's head for water, and you say these little verses. And it is very powerful. When I was doing the invocations of air, when I first started doing the channel, I would always do an invocation of air before I did the live streams or whatever I was doing. And it really did feel very powerful and effective. I think you've just not got to get too bound up in thinking that this is the true way, this is the way. All stories are equally untrue and useful. So it says, near the end of the vibration, stab the center of the sigil and see it burst into orange flame. The sign of the eagle is an exalted symbol of Scorpio, and it shows the volatilization of water, a positive spiritual aspect of that sign. Give the grade sign of Practicus. Stand upright with your feet together. Bring your flattened hands together, touching the index finger to index finger and thumb to thumb, forming a triangle in the space between. And hold this triangle, pointing downward momentarily over your second chakra. Holding this salute to the powers of water, say, Thou art reflected upon the sea, and a path of light lieth upon the waters, from the feet of creation to the crown. Turn clockwise to the west. Do the pentagram again. Say, Thy garment is as darkness, and it covereth and revealeth thee in the encircling of the void. Turn to the east. Do the symbols again. Say, Thy dew is as the purest, even as it descendeth as droplets into the resounding body of time. Beautiful. Turn to the north and say, Thou art here, even here, in thy broken reflection, and thy rivers sustaineth the world, even as they weareth away the vestiges of stability. Amen. Elohim of hosts, glory be to the Ruach Elohim, who moved upon the face of the waters of creation. Amen. Very beautiful poetic invocations there. Okay, I'm going to do this poem and then I'm going to get out of here. Thank you very much, everyone. I'm sorry it's been a bit all over the shop. Okay, this is a poem I published on the... Is it okay? Is the music too loud? Can everyone hear the voice okay? So this is a poem called The Spirit Model, Invocation of I Am Become. The needle my sword, the crack pipe my chalice, Valium pantacle, pornography wand, I cast thee away. Out, demon, out, O filthy parasite. You, the deceiver, bringer of death and sorrow. I cast thee out in the names of Saroth, Iseth, Thosis El-Roy. I am triumphus, victorial, recoverovable, and uncompropotheth. I am the first and the last, Abba and Baba, xenotantric and zectomorphous. I am the pure morning and ultimate midnight. I come without going, start without stopping. I am the irresistible, flickering, incandescent shallow bath. I crash against the rocks with spume and foamy vigor. I glisten on the sweet mountain grass under the lilac spider moon. I rise on scented currents as the sun explodes and the stars flee from my Aldepan, the Pandemonicon. I live and die with every heartbeat. I fluctuate, penetrate, oscillate. I vibrate. I am everywhere I look, and all things issue forth from me. I am terrorist, percussionist, endless and infinite. I create, I destroy. I hold all things in my embrace and dissolve with my tongue. I am without meaning and incomprehensible, without rhyme or reason. I am ancient and enduring. I rise and fall, coming and going in great shuddering gasps and paroxysms. Hark unto me, O I am becoming. Thank you very much. Keep safe and well, everyone. I'll see you all very soon. Thank you, Sir Lux. Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Nine. Thank you, Davy. Thank you, Jet Petty. Thank you, Solar Star. Have I forgotten anyone? Lord Josh was in for a while. Out of Mind, thank you. Prospero, thank you. Solar Star, of course, thank you. I think that's everyone. John Aside, thanks very much, mate. Okay, with that, I will leave you. Farewell.